the all head-to-head points team. This is obviously based on the CBS Sports head-to-head point scoring format, where you get 1 point for each of a single, walk, hit by pitch, run, and RBI, 2 points for a double or a stolen base, 3 points for a triple, and 4 points for a home run. You get negative half a point for a hitter strikeout. On the pitching side of things, 3 points per inning pitched, half a point for strikeouts, 7 for a win, 7 for a save, 3 for a quality start, and -1 for each of a walk, earned run, hit by pitch, and -5 for a loss.
And the biggest differences there from maybe some other head-to-head points formats you see are we only do -1/2 for strikeouts, both on the hitting and pitching end. Some do full -1 point, which greatly reduces the pool of usable players, I would say. And then stolen bases being worth 2 points for hitters in our format. A lot of times you see only 1. It helps keep base stealers value closer to where it is in Roto. And 3 points for an inning for pitchers. Sometimes you see just 1. So that helps to reward the high volume guys, even if they're not necessarily the most dominant inning for inning. And my choices here for the all head-to-head and all Roto teams are meant to be the most representative player of that format. Obviously, they're not the best in that format because that would be kind of obvious. Yeah. These are the ones whose value changes the most or changes in a way that you could credit to it being one scoring format or the other.
All right, so in the infield of the all head-to-head points team, you have Adley Rutschman at catcher, Vinny Pasquantino, Vinny P.
Baby.
At second base, we have Jonathan India. At third base, we have Alex Bregman. And at shortstop, we have Corey Seager. Scott, anything to add to those names? Seager, Bregman, India, Vinny P, and Adley Rutschman.
Well, something they all have in common is they walk a lot. Vinny Pasquantino, I think the disparity is even bigger because he doesn't homer at the rate that you'd prefer for a first baseman. But the plate discipline is so good, not just the walks, but the lack of strikeouts, that it more than makes up for any shortcoming in home runs in a points league. So I have him ranked much higher in points than in Roto. Jonathan India, kind of the same thing there, but a less extreme version than Pasquantino, I would say. And then with Seager, part of the justification for having him here, of course, he's great in both formats, but he is one of just two shortstops that are widely drafted in Roto that contributes virtually nothing in stolen bases. He and Carlos Correa, who I had an honorable mention for each of these positions. Carlos Correa is the honorable mention. So it makes for a difficult build in Roto if you take either Seager as your shortstop or Correa more likely middle infielder, but you're normally expecting to get steals out of those spots. And those two, Seager and Correa, just aren't going to contribute that. Don't mind it in head-to-head points because they're doing so many other things, and you don't care where the points come from as long as they're there. But it's a bigger issue in Roto.
I do want to add, Adley Rutschman definitely better in points than Roto. Before his injury, though, last year, which was, I think, June 27th is the date that he took a foul tip off the hand, he looked like he was just emerging as
a stud,
a superstar in regardless of form. He's always been a guy who more doubles than home runs.
He's number 2 in Roto still, obviously.
Not obviously. I didn't realize he's the number 3 catcher in NFBC drafts.
Oh, really? Who passed him?
Yair Diaz is like 6 picks ahead of him now. And I think that's
I don't see that in a lot of drafts.
Yeah.
Probably just an NFBC specific thing. But go ahead. I agree. It doesn't make sense.
I think that's a big mistake. I think Yair Diaz is... I added him to Bus 2.0. I like the player, but I think the playing time is going to be a little harder to come by this year in a way that is not true for Adley Rutschman. So that was just something that I noticed earlier today when I was doing my bus, that Yair Diaz is the number 2 catcher in NFBC leagues.
Yeah. And the reason for your playing time concerns with Yair Diaz is that Yordan Alvarez expected to play more DH this season.
Full-time DH, yeah.
And they have Christian Walker at first base, assuming he's healthy. And so that just takes away 2 avenues from Yair Diaz to be able to get more playing time, something he did last year.
Started 47 games between DH and first base last year.
Yep. Some of those honorable mentions in the infield in the all head-to-head points league: Gabriel Moreno, Josh Naylor, Marcus Semien, Max Muncy, and Carlos Correa. Those last two names in particular, Muncy and Correa, they are ultimate fallbacks at their respective positions, and it could work because on a per-game basis, they're still really good in this format. And also, it's a shallower format, so you can take on quote-unquote risky or injury-prone players because the replacement value is so much better on the waiver wire.
Yeah.
Yep.
In fact, I would say that Muncy, the difference between Muncy's and Correa's head-to-head points value and Roto value is even bigger than the difference for Bregman and Seager, who are the actual starters, not the honorable mentions. It just, I don't know. Sometimes it felt weird to put the better player as an honorable mention, and so sometimes I gave them the top spot instead. Bregman especially, like Bregman's always been a head-to-head point standout. Last year, his walk rate slipped, and so he wasn't as dominant in head-to-head points leagues as usual. But I'm presuming it's just a one-off because it was so out of character with the rest of his career, and he looks like he's going to be a threat playing his home games at Fenway Park with the Green Monster. So I think he'll get back to walking like normal. And when he walks like normal, it's not uncommon for Alex Bregman to be better in head-to-head points per game than like Austin Riley even.
Yep. In the outfield, all head-to-head points team, you have Juan Soto, Brandon Nimmo, and Ian Happ, with an honorable mention to Jurickson Profar. Chris, no surprise, all four of those names really good in on-base percentage.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. None of them really steal many bases. Nimmo has gotten to stealing bases over the past couple of years, but with the plantar fasciitis and the knee, it's fair to wonder if he's going to steal quite as many bases this year. So I think that makes
a decent amount.
He's usually like what, 8 to 10. So. Okay.
Hap, I think he's like 15-ish usually.
Okay, so yeah, but he usually has very good on base percentage, walks a lot,
ton of doubles.
That's
Hap's
the biggest
a doubles machine.
Yeah,
Hap has at least 34 doubles each of the last 3 years.
Scott, did you think about including Steven Kwan at all in this mix?
I thought about it.
Outfield, yeah.
He's somebody who gains value in points leagues. The reason I didn't go with him is sometimes he can be a batting average specialist at an opportune time in Roto. Like, oh, I need to catch up in batting average. Oh, good, Kwan's still there. So it's sort of like Luis Ariz, where on the whole, I think they're better in points leagues, but they have that one specialty that makes them kind of the perfect pick at times in Roto.
Yeah, that makes sense. At starting pitcher, you have Aaron Nola, Logan Webb, Zach Gallen, Seth Lugo, and Mitch Keller. And a lot of these names throw a lot of innings. Aaron Nola, the most innings in baseball since 2018. Logan Webb, 190 plus 3 years in a row. And Seth Lugo was just second in baseball with 206 and 2/3 innings last season.
Yep. Throw a lot of innings, pile up complete games. Their ERAs and whips might run a little hot, but that doesn't bother you so much in a points league because it's not scored directly, ERA and whip. It's, giving up hits, walks, earned runs, that counts against them. But if they're pitching so many innings, they can kind of cover over that. The innings are the more important thing. And somebody like Keller, specifically Mitch Keller, who I just want to touch in a Roto league at this point because of the damage he could do to ERA and whip. The vast majority of his starts are going to score a lot of points. He's going to work deep into games consistently. But then he has those really ugly starts that ruin the ERA and whip. You'll take your lumps that week with him in a points league, but for the most part, you're going to be pretty happy with him because of the way the majority of his starts go.
All right, at relief pitcher for the all head-to-head points team, you have Robert Suarez and Clay Holmes, who is a Sparp on CBS. Shout out to the other Sparps as well: Jackson Jobe, Bowden Francis, Nick Martinez, Grant Holmes, Chris Bubich. Scott, how did you land?
I obviously could have put only Sparps here, but it felt redundant, so I just chose Holmes and I put a reliever, Robert Suarez, who I think is in line for a lot of saves, but maybe in a way that's kind of ugly. I could have put Kyle Finnegan there, I guess, but I went with Suarez instead.
Doesn't get a lot of strikeouts, so that'll hold his Roto value back a little bit as well.
All right, let's move over to the 2025 All Roto team, and this is for the standard 5x5 categories, including batting average, runs, home runs, RBI, and steals on the hitting side, and wins, ERA, whip, strikeouts, and saves on the pitching side. For the infield at catcher, it's Yainer Diaz. At first base, Jake Berger. Second base, Luis Garcia Jr. Third base, Austin Riley. And shortstop, C.J. Abrams. Scott, what was your reasoning for these names in All Roto?
Well, Yainer Diaz, I mean, I guess it's kind of the inverse of the infield for the head-to-head points lineup, right? These guys don't walk by and large. Yainer Diaz, one of the worst walkers in baseball, famously doesn't walk. He's still a top 5 catcher in points leagues, but there's a bigger gap between 1 and 2, William Contreras and Adley Rutschman, and then the whole next group.
Especially because that whole next group kind of has terrible plate discipline.
Yeah, Cal Raleigh walks a fine amount, but he strikes out a ton. And then Salvador Perez would be the other one who just doesn't walk much.
Yeah, Yainer Diaz and Salvador Perez, basically the same. Perez a little more power forward, Diaz a little more batting average, but very similar plate discipline metrics.
Yep. Berger, again, doesn't walk much. Big power, though, and first base eligible at kind of the ideal spot in a Roto league where it looks like the choices for those, either that position or that category, it looks like they're running low. So I could be really excited to draft him in Roto, but just not interested at all in a points league.
Not sure he could go undrafted in a points league, and I think it would be okay.
Luis Garcia, same thing. With the added issue of him probably not being a full-time player, that hurts more in a head-to-head points league where volume is always a point of emphasis. And, a week where the Nationals are facing a bunch of lefties, Luis Garcia would be pretty useless to you. Austin Riley is the one that's probably the hardest to swallow because he's a stud in either format, but I talked about it a minute ago with Alex Bregman. 4-category monster in Roto, but the plate discipline is just kind of unappealing, and it brings him down to a level where he's slightly less than a stud in a points league, I would say, so that Alex Bregman can compete with him, and even somebody like Alec Boehm can come close to Austin Riley's production on a per game basis. So I feel like third base, if you don't get Jose Ramirez in the first round in a points league, it's probably a position where you should wait a while.
Yeah, because it's also true of Rafael Devers.
Less true for him, but obviously he has.
Yeah, he does. He just doesn't. He doesn't walk a ton. Jazz Chisholm has bad plate discipline and steals a ton of bases. Machado, kind of similar to Austin Riley. He walks a little bit, but not a ton. He strikes out a decent amount. So yeah, all those guys probably get a little bit of a downgrade in a points league.
Some honorable mentions for the All Roto infield: Salvador Perez, Ryan Mountcastle, Jordan Westberg, Mark Vientos, and Bo Bichette. All of those names don't walk very much. Vientos strikes out quite a bit, and Bo Bichette doesn't walk much either, but also doesn't strike out much. Should hit for a good batting average, but yeah, the OBP just isn't usually a big one there for Bo Bichette. In the outfield, you've got Julio Rodriguez, Michael Harris, and Brenton Doyle. Lots of power and speed here, Scott, with an honorable mention to Pete Crow Armstrong. Lots of power and speed, but also pretty questionable plate discipline for all four.
Yeah, it's always shocking to me. Even his first 2 years, Michael Harris, as good as his first 2 years were, where he hit over 290, it's always shocking to me how low the point per game average is. It's below 3 generally, and given his stature in fantasy, you'd expect it to be higher than that. He's kind of an also-ran starter in a 3 outfielder points league. Julio Rodriguez, he goes from being a borderline first rounder in Roto to a borderline second in points league, I would say, because of the poor plate discipline. Doyle, the strikeouts are going to be very high, and the steals not as useful as in Roto. You mentioned Pete Crow Armstrong here as the honorable mention. He represents a trio of outfielders that I like taking in a Roto league for the amount of steals they could give me at what I think is a pretty good value. But I just have almost no interest in them in a points league. And so it's Pete Crow Armstrong, and the other two are Josh Lowe and Cedric Mullins.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Chris, you highlighted Brenton Doyle recently as maybe the player whose value changes the most from a head-to-head points league to a Roto league.
Yeah, and I think another part of it is he's playing in Coors Field. He's going to still be useful in a head-to-head points league, but he's also one of those guys where if you draft him and you've got him on your team and they've got 6 games on the road, he's probably not useful because he had a 635 OPS away from home last year. And I think look, I think he's a better hitter than that. I don't think he's the guy that if he left Coors Field, it'd just be a 635 OPS. There are reasons why Rockies hitters hit worse away from home. But as long as he's there, that's going to be an issue.
All right, starting pitchers on the All Roto team, all the Dodgers. That's it. We can basically move on. No, it's strong per inning producers, but questions about workload. So Garrett Crochet, Blake Snell, Jacob deGrom, Tyler Glasnow, and Yoshinobu Yamamoto.
Yeah, this pitching staff looks on paper a lot better than the head-to-head points pitching staff, doesn't it? It's just availability questions, and not just over the course of the season, but also within a game. How deep are they going to work into the game? That's been an issue for Blake Snell at times. I imagine, it was an issue for Yoshinobu Yamamoto last year. It could be an issue for Jacob deGrom if they're working to preserve his arm. They might pull him early at times this year. And then Garrett Crochet, of course, totally untested with a high end, with a full-time starter's workload. It was really just the first half last year where he got that kind of workload.
The one thing I would quibble with is Glasnow and I guess Snell, although I think it's more true of Glasnow than Snell. When Glasnow pitches, he's an ace.
They treated him like a workhorse.
He averaged over 6 innings per start last year. Snell, he'll throw a lot of pitches, but he has never averaged 6 innings per start in a season because he's so inefficient. So that's why I say it's less true of Glasnow than Snell, but there is the added wrinkle this year of at some point they will probably have a 6-man rotation.
Yeah.
Although that seems less guaranteed now than it did a week ago when we learned all the Shohei Ohtani stuff.
And part of it's just that, okay, these guys, you expect them to excel in ERA, whip, and strikeouts. And those are the 3 contributions that clearly aren't as valuable in a points league. You want volume. So, again, ERA and whip, they have no direct reward in a points league. Strikeouts, they're worth a half a point each, but that's not nearly as... That makes them far less valuable in a points league than in a Roto league. So part of it's just, okay, these are pitchers I like for Roto, but in a points league, I'm just not that interested. And actually, Blake Snell is the one pitcher that I tier differently for points leagues than for Roto. I am a tier higher in Roto.
Mm-hmm.
And then for relief pitcher, you have AJ Puck and Edwin Uceta. Both are speculative saves options this season, but would virtually give us nothing in a points league, I would say, unless they become the closer for their respective.
Unless they become a closer, they're obviously, you could make the argument every closer is more valuable in a Roto league than a points league. I've talked plenty of times just this draft prep season about how I wait until the end of a points league draft to take my closers. Usually, they're in higher demand in Roto leagues. The saves contribution itself is more valuable, but again, like you said, Frank, Puck and Uceta, there's absolutely no reason to draft them in a points league. In a Roto league, particularly a deeper one, they might be the best you could do at a certain point in the draft when all the true saves guys are gone. You might still take them, hoping they can pad your ratios in the meantime and eventually move into a closer role. But they're not worth putting in your lineup. They're not going to do anything valuable enough in a points league to make them even worth considering there.